Imagine waking up one morning with the strangest sensation, as if you've been living someone else's life for years, following rules you never agreed to, pursuing goals that feel hollow the moment you achieve them. You stand before your bathroom mirror, and for just a fleeting second, the person staring back seems like a stranger wearing your face. There's something unsettling in their eyes, something that whispers, "This isn't who you really are." You shake it off, tell yourself it's just morning grogginess, but the feeling lingers throughout the day. At work, surrounded by colleagues, discussing quarterly reports and weekend plans, you find yourself observing from what feels like another dimension. Their words reach you as if through water, muffled, distant, somehow unreal. You nod at the right moments, laugh at the appropriate jokes, but deep inside, a voice grows louder. What if everything you've been taught about success, about fitting in, about being normal, is actually the very thing destroying your soul? This isn't depression. This isn't anxiety. This is something far more profound and far more dangerous to ignore. You are one of the rarest types of human beings to walk this earth. Carl Jung, the pioneering psychologist who mapped the hidden territories of the human psyche, identified you as something extraordinary. An intuitive introvert, you represent less than 1% of the population. Yet you've been trying to live like the other 99. And that contradiction isn't just making you miserable. It's literally killing parts of your authentic self every single day. But here's where the story becomes truly disturbing. You've been conditioned to see your greatest gifts as weaknesses. Society has systematically taught you to be ashamed of the very qualities that make you most human, most creative, most capable of touching something transcendent. Your tendency to see patterns others miss gets labeled as overthinking. Your need for solitude becomes antisocial behavior. Your ability to sense the deeper currents beneath surface conversations gets dismissed as being too sensitive. Jung himself wrestled with this paradox. Here was a man who could peer into the collective unconscious, who could map the archetypal forces that drive human behavior, who could unlock the mysteries of dreams and synchronicity. Yet he often felt like an alien in his own culture. He once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are." But what happens when who you are seems incompatible with the world you must navigate? This is your daily reality. You possess what Jung called the transcendent function, the rare ability to bridge the conscious and unconscious realms, to access insights that emerge from depths most people never even know exist. Your mind doesn't just process information, it communes with the invisible patterns that connect all things. You don't just see what is, you perceive what could be, what wants to emerge, what's trying to be born. Yet every day, you're forced to compress this vast inner universe into acceptable social formats. You learn to speak in half-truths because your full truth sounds too strange to others. You develop elaborate masks to hide the intensity of your inner life. You begin to doubt your own perceptions because they don't align with consensus reality. But what if I told you that this struggle isn't a bug in your system? It's a feature. What if your difficulty fitting into conventional structures isn't a personal failing, but a profound gift to humanity? What if the very qualities that make you feel like an outsider are actually preparing you for something far more significant than climbing corporate ladders or accumulating social media likes. Jung believed that intuitive introverts serve as society's early warning system. It's bridges between worlds. It's guardians of meaning in an increasingly meaningless age. But to fulfill this role, you must first understand why you feel so fundamentally different, why the modern world seems designed to suffocate your spirit, and why your greatest source of pain might actually be your greatest source of power. The question that will haunt you until you answer it honestly is this: will you continue sacrificing your authentic nature to fit into a world that doesn't understand you? Or will you finally have the courage to live as the rare being you actually are? Even if it means walking a path that others cannot see, cannot follow, and will never fully comprehend? Everything you thought you knew about yourself is about to change. The tragedy of your existence isn't what you think it is. It's not that you're broken, inadequate, or failing to live up to some universal standard of success. The real tragedy is that you've been living in a civilization that was never designed for minds like yours, a civilization that mistakes your greatest strengths for pathologies and your deepest insights for delusions. To understand why you feel so fundamentally displaced, you must first grasp what Jung discovered about the architecture of human consciousness. He identified 4 primary psychological functions: thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition. Most people rely primarily on the first 3. They think their way through problems, feel their way through relationships, and sense their way through immediate reality. But you operate from the 4th dimension, the one that most people can barely access. Intuition in Jung's framework isn't just a hunch or a lucky guess. It's a sophisticated perceptual apparatus that bypasses sensory data and logical analysis to grasp the hidden patterns, the emerging possibilities, the unconscious currents that flow beneath the surface of ordinary experience. When you combine this with introversion, the natural orientation toward your inner world, rather than external social dynamics, you become something unprecedented, a living bridge between the seen and unseen realms of existence. Friedrich Nietzsche, another brilliant mind who struggled with his own alienation from conventional society, wrote about what he called the eternal recurrence, the idea that we're doomed to repeat the same patterns unless we develop the courage to create new values. But here's what Nietzsche didn't fully grasp. Intuitive introverts, like you, are the ones capable of perceiving these patterns before they manifest. You're not just living through the eternal recurrence. You're the early detection system for humanity's next evolutionary leap. This is why you feel so restless in static environments. Why small talk feels like psychological torture. Why you can sense the undercurrents of tension in a room before anyone else even realizes conflict is brewing. Your psyche is constantly scanning for what Jung called the transcendent function, the mysterious process by which new consciousness emerges from the tension between opposites. While others are focused on maintaining equilibrium, you're unconsciously attuned to the creative chaos from which genuine transformation arises. But here's where the problem begins. Our educational systems, our economic structures, our social institutions, they're all built around what Jung termed the collective persona. This is the mask that society requires everyone to wear, the standardized version of humanity that keeps the machinery of civilization running smoothly. The collective persona rewards conformity, predictability, and the ability to function as an interchangeable part in a larger system. Arthur Schopenhauer understood this dilemma intimately. He wrote about the fundamental conflict between the individual will, your authentic nature, and the world as representation. The socially constructed reality that demands your participation. For most people, this tension is manageable because their inner nature roughly aligns with social expectations. But for you, the gap is a chasm. Your will demands solitude, depth, meaning, and creative expression. The world demands networking, surface-level productivity, and adherence to predetermined scripts for success. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps and went on to develop logotherapy, discovered that humans can endure almost any suffering if they can find meaning in it. But what happens when the very search for meaning becomes the source of your suffering? This is the existential trap that ensnares intuitive introverts. You're compelled by your nature to seek deeper significance, yet you're surrounded by systems that offer only shallow rewards. Jean-Paul Sartre spoke of bad faith, the way humans deceive themselves to avoid the anxiety of authentic existence. But for intuitive introverts, the situation is reversed. You're cursed with an inability to accept bad faith, even when it would make your life easier. You can't pretend that meaningless work has meaning. You can't fake enthusiasm for social rituals that feel empty. You can't silence the inner voice that keeps asking, "Is this all there is?" This creates what Jung identified as a specific form of neurosis. Not the classical neuroses born from repressed sexuality or aggression, but a spiritual neurosis born from the suppression of your authentic psychological type. When an intuitive introvert tries to live as an extroverted sensor, when they force themselves into roles that require constant external stimulation and immediate practical results, their psyche begins to revolt. The symptoms aren't just psychological, they're existential. Depression becomes not just sadness, but a profound sense of meaninglessness. Anxiety becomes not just worry, but a constant fear that you're wasting your life pursuing things that don't matter. Yet here's the cruel irony. The more desperately you try to fit in, the more isolated you become. The more you suppress your natural tendencies, the more alien you feel. The persona you develop to navigate the external world becomes a prison that separates you from both others and yourself. The hidden force that shapes your daily experience is this constant tension between your authentic nature and the adaptive strategies you've developed to survive in a world that doesn't recognize your value. And until you understand this dynamic fully, you'll remain trapped in a cycle of self-betrayal that masquerades as self-improvement. The damage isn't immediately visible. It doesn't announce itself with dramatic breakdowns or obvious symptoms. Instead, it seeps into every corner of your existence like water through hairline cracks, slowly eroding the foundation of who you are, until one day you wake up and realize you've become a stranger to yourself. The first casualty is your relationship with your own intuition. That voice that once whispered profound insights, that inner compass that could navigate complexity with startling clarity, begins to grow quiet. Not because it's gone, but because you've learned to ignore it so consistently that it retreats deeper into your unconscious. You start second-guessing every instinct, dismissing every flash of insight as just imagination or wishful thinking. This creates what cognitive psychologists call learned helplessness. But in your case, it's more insidious. It's learned meaninglessness. You begin to doubt not just your ability to make good decisions, but your capacity to recognize what's worth deciding about in the first place. The questions that once energized you. What does this mean? Where is this leading? What wants to emerge here? Start to feel like luxuries you can't afford in a world that rewards only immediate, measurable results. Meanwhile, your nervous system is paying a price that won't show up on any medical exam. Introverts require significantly more downtime to process experiences and recharge their mental batteries. But you've been conditioned to see this need as weakness, as laziness, as antisocial behavior. So you override your natural rhythms, forcing yourself into constant social and professional engagement until your entire system operates in a state of chronic overstimulation. The neurological consequences are profound. Your brain, designed to excel at pattern recognition and deep processing, becomes stuck in a perpetual state of shallow scanning. You lose access to what neuroscientists call the default mode network, the neural configuration that allows for introspection, meaning-making, and creative synthesis. Instead, you're trapped in task-positive networks, constantly reacting to external demands, but never accessing the inner stillness where your greatest insights arise. This manifests in ways that seem paradoxical to others, but feel devastatingly familiar to you. You become simultaneously hypersensitive and emotionally numb. Hypersensitive because your nervous system is perpetually overwhelmed, picking up on subtleties and undercurrents that others miss. Numb because you've had to develop psychological armor to survive the constant friction between your inner world and outer demands. You start experiencing what Jung called the transcendent function in reverse. Instead of bridging conscious and unconscious to create new possibilities, you find yourself trapped between worlds, belonging fully to neither. Your conscious mind becomes hypervigilant, constantly monitoring for social cues and external expectations. Your unconscious becomes a repository of abandoned dreams, suppressed insights, and creative impulses that have nowhere to go. The social consequences ripple outward in patterns you barely recognize. Relationships become performances rather than connections. You develop an uncanny ability to sense what others need from you, but you lose touch with what you need from them. You become the person others come to for deep conversations and profound insights. Yet you feel fundamentally lonely because no one seems capable of seeing and appreciating the full complexity of who you are. This creates what psychologists call the authenticity paradox. The more authentic you try to be, the more isolated you become, because your authentic self operates on frequencies that most people simply can't receive. So you learn to modulate yourself, to translate your complex inner experiences into socially acceptable sound bites. You become fluent in multiple versions of yourself, each calibrated for different audiences until you're no longer sure which one is real. Your career trajectory becomes a series of compromises that feel like small deaths. You excel in roles that require insight, creativity, and the ability to see the big picture. But these roles are often undervalued or misunderstood in organizations focused on short-term metrics and immediate results. You watch less intuitive, but more extroverted colleagues advance past you, not because they're more capable, but because they're better at playing the visibility game that modern workplaces reward. The most devastating consequence, though, is what happens to your sense of purpose. Intuitive introverts are driven by what Jung called the religious function. Not necessarily traditional religion, but the deep human need to participate in something meaningful, to feel connected to patterns larger than individual existence. When this function is frustrated, when you're forced to invest your energy in activities that feel hollow or actively harmful, you don't just become unhappy. You begin to experience what Frankl called existential vacuum. This isn't ordinary boredom or dissatisfaction. It's the profound emptiness that comes from feeling disconnected from your essential nature, from the sense that your life has become a series of meaningless tasks performed to meet other people's expectations. You may achieve everything society tells you should make you happy: career advancement, financial security, social recognition, yet feel more empty with each accomplishment. The cruelest irony is that the very sensitivity that makes you suffer also makes you indispensable to human evolution. Your ability to perceive emerging patterns, to sense the collective shadow, to recognize when systems are breaking down or when new possibilities are trying to emerge. These aren't personal quirks. They're evolutionary adaptations that humanity desperately needs as we navigate increasingly complex challenges. But instead of honoring this gift, instead of creating spaces where your unique contributions can flourish, society has conditioned you to see your sensitivity as a liability and your depth as an inconvenience. You've internalized the message that there's something wrong with you for not thriving in environments designed for fundamentally different types of minds. The question that haunts every quiet moment is no longer just, "What's wrong with me?" but something far more disturbing. What am I becoming by trying so hard not to be who I am? The rebellion begins not with a dramatic gesture, but with a single, radical act: the decision to stop apologizing for who you are. This isn't about becoming selfish or inconsiderate. It's about recognizing that your sensitivity, your need for solitude, your tendency to see patterns others miss, these aren't character flaws to be corrected. They're the raw materials of genius that have been systematically devalued by a culture obsessed with extroversion and immediate results. Jung himself modeled this rebellion. Despite pressure from his academic peers to conform to Freudian orthodoxy, he chose to follow his own psychological investigations wherever they led, into mythology, alchemy, Eastern philosophy, and the study of synchronicity. He was ridiculed by mainstream psychology for decades, yet his willingness to honor his intuitive insights ultimately revolutionized our understanding of the human psyche. His courage to be authentically himself gave birth to analytical psychology and influenced everything from personality theory to the modern self-help movement. But Jung's rebellion wasn't just intellectual, it was deeply personal. He created what he called his Red Book, a private journal where he recorded his encounters with his own unconscious through active imagination. For years, he kept this work secret, knowing it was too strange, too personal, too far outside conventional psychological discourse to share publicly. Yet this private rebellion against academic respectability became the source of his most profound insights. Your rebellion must follow a similar pattern. It begins in the hidden spaces of your inner life, in the moments when you choose to honor your authentic responses rather than your adaptive ones. It starts when you stop pretending to be energized by networking events and instead acknowledge that they drain your life force. It continues when you stop apologizing for needing silence to think and start demanding the space your mind requires to function at its highest level. The first battleground is your relationship with solitude. Western culture has pathologized aloneness, treating it as loneliness, as social failure, as something to be cured. But for the intuitive introvert, solitude isn't the absence of connection. It's the precondition for authentic connection, both with yourself and ultimately with others. In solitude, your nervous system finally gets permission to stop monitoring external demands and start accessing the deeper currents of insight that define your true nature. This means you must become what the Stoic philosophers called autarkic, psychologically self-sufficient. Not because relationships don't matter, but because you can only offer genuine connection when you're not dependent on others for your sense of worth or identity. Marcus Aurelius, himself likely an intuitive introvert, wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." The second rebellion involves reclaiming your right to think differently. The modern world rewards speed over depth, conclusions over questions, certainty over complexity. But your mind is designed for what Jung called amplification, the process of exploring ideas through multiple associations, connections, and symbolic resonances. You don't just think about problems. You commune with them, allowing insights to emerge organically from the depths of contemplation. This means you must resist the pressure to have instant opinions, immediate answers, quick solutions to complex problems. Instead, you must learn to say, "Let me think about that," or "I need time to process this," or "The answer isn't immediately clear to me." These aren't admissions of ignorance. They're declarations of intellectual integrity. Historical examples abound of intuitive introverts who changed the world precisely because they refused to think like everyone else. Einstein's theory of relativity emerged not from rapid calculation, but from years of thought experiments and imaginative play. Darwin's theory of evolution came from decades of patient observation and synthesis. Gandhi's philosophy of nonviolent resistance developed through deep contemplation of spiritual and political principles that seemed contradictory to others, but revealed their underlying unity to his intuitive perception. The third rebellion is perhaps the most challenging: learning to value your own timing over external urgency. The world operates on schedules, deadlines, and quarterly reports, but your psyche operates on rhythms of incubation, insight, and integration that can't be rushed or forced. You must develop what Jung called the patience of the alchemist, the willingness to let psychological processes unfold at their natural pace rather than demanding immediate transformation. This doesn't mean becoming passive or procrastinating. It means distinguishing between genuine urgency and artificial pressure, between deadlines that serve authentic purposes and those that simply feed the collective anxiety of a culture that has forgotten how to be still. It means protecting your creative process from the violence of premature exposure, allowing your insights to ripen in the darkness before bringing them into the light of social scrutiny. The final act of rebellion is the most radical. Choosing meaning over success, depth over achievement, authenticity over approval. This isn't about rejecting worldly success entirely, but about refusing to pursue it at the cost of your soul. It's about recognizing that for intuitive introverts, traditional markers of success often feel hollow because they don't align with your deeper sense of purpose. Instead, you must learn to measure your life by different metrics: the quality of your insights, the depth of your relationships, the degree to which you're living in alignment with your authentic nature, the ways you're contributing to the expansion of human consciousness. You must become what Nietzsche called a free spirit, someone who creates their own values rather than inheriting them from the collective. This rebellion isn't easy. It requires tremendous courage to live as a minority psychological type in a world designed for the majority. It demands the willingness to be misunderstood, to be seen as strange or difficult or impractical. But the alternative, continuing to suffocate your authentic nature in service of fitting in, is not really living at all. It's merely surviving. The moment you stop trying to become someone else and start becoming more fully yourself, everything changes. The energy you've been wasting on psychological masquerade becomes available for creative expression. The insights you've been suppressing start flowing freely. The connections you've been seeking begin to appear naturally as authentic people recognize and are drawn to your authenticity. Here is the truth that will shatter everything you thought you knew about your place in the world. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are not failing at life. You are the early prototype of what humanity is becoming. Jung understood this with startling clarity. He saw that the psychological types he was mapping weren't just descriptions of current human variation. They were glimpses into humanity's evolutionary trajectory. The intuitive introverts of today are the bridge between humanity's current state of consciousness and whatever comes next. Your struggles aren't personal failures. They're growing pains of a species in transition. Consider this: every major leap in human consciousness has been initiated by individuals who operated outside the normal parameters of their time, the mystics who perceived unity behind apparent separation, the scientists who saw patterns where others saw chaos, the artists who gave form to experiences that had no words, the philosophers who questioned assumptions so fundamental that others couldn't even recognize them as assumptions. These weren't just gifted individuals. They were psychological pioneers, exploring territories of consciousness that the collective had never mapped. You are part of this lineage. Your inability to find satisfaction in conventional success isn't a character flaw. It's an evolutionary imperative. Your nervous system isn't overreacting to the demands of modern life. It's accurately perceiving the psychological violence of systems designed for a less conscious humanity. Your need for meaning isn't naive idealism. It's the voice of a more evolved form of consciousness trying to emerge through you. The ultimate paradox of your existence is that your greatest source of suffering is also your greatest gift to the world. Your sensitivity to meaninglessness makes you incapable of participating in systems that harm others. Your need for authenticity prevents you from contributing to the collective delusion that mistake activity for purpose. Your insistence on depth keeps alive values that would otherwise disappear in the rush towards surface-level efficiency. Jung called this the transcendent function in action, the mysterious process by which individual psychological development contributes to the evolution of collective consciousness. Every time you choose authenticity over approval, depth over achievement, meaning over success, you're not just transforming your own life. You're modeling a different way of being human for others who are ready to see it. But here's the revelation that changes everything. The very qualities that make you feel like an alien in current society are preparing you to be a native of the world that's emerging. As humanity faces challenges that can't be solved through old patterns of thinking, climate change, technological disruption, spiritual emptiness, social fragmentation, the skills of the intuitive introvert become essential survival tools for the species. Your ability to see patterns across vast scales of time and complexity, your capacity to hold paradox without rushing to premature resolution, your sensitivity to the unconscious currents that drive collective behavior, your natural orientation toward meaning-making rather than mere problem-solving. These aren't personal quirks. They're evolutionary adaptations that humanity desperately needs as we navigate an increasingly complex future. The suffering you've experienced isn't meaningless. It's been your initiation into a form of consciousness that can hold both the beauty and terror of existence without splitting them into false categories. You've learned to live with questions that have no easy answers, to find meaning in experiences that can't be reduced to simple formulas, to maintain hope in the face of complexity that would overwhelm minds trained only for certainty. This is why your relationships have felt so difficult, why conventional career paths have felt like death, why normal pleasures have left you empty. You weren't failing at being human. You were succeeding at being a different kind of human, one that current society doesn't yet know how to recognize or support. The moment you truly understand this, everything shifts. The loneliness transforms into solitude, not the absence of connection, but the presence of profound communion with the deeper patterns of existence. The sensitivity becomes a superpower, not a vulnerability to be protected, but a sophisticated instrument for navigating reality's hidden dimensions. The intensity becomes a source of creative power, not an embarrassment to be tamed, but a force capable of birthing new forms of beauty and meaning. You stop waiting for the world to understand you and start expressing yourself so authentically that you create spaces where others can be authentic too. You stop trying to fit into existing structures and start building new ones that honor the full spectrum of human psychological diversity. You stop apologizing for your differences and start celebrating them as gifts to a world hungry for deeper ways of being. The ultimate truth is this: your struggles have been shaping you into exactly the kind of person that a more conscious world will desperately need. Your wounds have become your wisdom. Your sensitivity has become your strength. Your inability to accept shallow answers has made you capable of asking questions that can crack open new possibilities for human flourishing. You are not broken. You are breaking through. You are not behind. You are ahead of a curve that most people can't even see yet. You are not failing at life. You are succeeding at becoming fully, authentically, courageously yourself. And in doing so, you're lighting a path that others will follow when they're ready to leave the safety of the known and venture into the mystery of what they might become. The world is waiting for you to stop hiding and start shining, not because it understands you yet, but because it needs what you have to offer more than either of you realizes. Your time is now. Your gifts are needed. Your authentic self is not a problem to be solved. It is a solution to problems the world doesn't even know how to name yet. The question is no longer whether you have the right to be who you are. The question is whether you have the courage to become who you were born to be, knowing that in doing so, you're helping to birth a more conscious future for all of humanity.